What if I told you that the biggest loser in the history of the Tudor dynasty was actually the smartest player in the room? We all know the rhyme. It is the nursery rhyme we learn to remember the body count of Henry VIII: divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. We are here to talk about wife number 4. The first divorced one was Catherine of Aragon. She fought the king for years, started a geopolitical firestorm, and died miserable, broken, and alone. But number 4, Anne of Cleves? History has been incredibly cruel to Anne. For 500 years, she has been the punchline of a bad joke. She is known as the Flanders Mare. That is a polite 16th century way of calling a woman a horse. The story goes like this. She was ugly, she was boring, she was smelly, she had no fashion sense. Henry took one look at her, vomited in his mouth, and dumped her 6 months later because he couldn't stand to be in the same room as her. She is the reject, the duff. That the humiliating footnote in Henry's saga? Stop right there. That is absolute 100% Tudor propaganda. I'm going to spoil the ending right now because you need to understand the magnitude of this heist. Anne of Cleves didn't lose. She pulled off the greatest scam in royal history. While the other wives were losing their heads, dying in childbirth, or being locked in damp castles, Anne of Cleves was sitting in a palace, drinking expensive wine, counting her money, and living her absolute best life as the wealthiest independent woman in England. She looked at a toxic, murderous tyrant and said, "You know what? You can keep the crown. I'll take the cash." This isn't just a story about a bad blind date. This is a masterclass on how to survive a toxic ex. Welcome to the story of the ultimate winner. To understand Anne's victory, we have to understand the game board she was playing on. It's 1539. Henry VIII is back on the market. His third wife, Jane Seymour, died 2 years ago, giving birth to a son. Now, in the movies, Henry VIII is often played by a dashing, charismatic guy, but the reality of 1539, Henry, it was a horror show. He is 48 years old. In Tudor times, that is ancient. He is massively, morbidly obese. We are talking about a waistline of 54 inches. He had to be hoisted onto his horse with a crane. And worst of all, he has a festering, ulcerated wound on his leg from a jousting accident that refuses to heal. Historians tell us this leg wound oozed pus constantly. It smelled so necrotic that you could smell the king coming from 3 rooms away. The royal doctors were constantly lancing it, draining it, and binding it. He was in constant physical pain, and because of that pain, he was moody, paranoid, and prone to killing people for fun. Basically, he is a walking red flag, but he needs a wife. Specifically, he needs a European ally. England is isolated. The Catholic superpowers France and Spain are threatening to invade. Enter Thomas Cromwell, the king's fixer, the chief minister, the guy who makes things happen. Cromwell says, "We need friends. The Germans are Protestants. Let's make a deal with the Duke of Cleves." The Duke of Cleves has 2 sisters. Henry says, "I don't care about politics. I don't care about theology." Is she hot? This is the eternal problem with Henry. He thinks with his libido, not his brain. He still thinks he is the 25-year-old golden prince. He has zero self-awareness. So, they send the famous artist Hans Holbein to Germany to paint a portrait of Anne. Think of Holbein as the original Instagram filter. His job wasn't to paint reality. His job was to sell a product. He was the marketing department. He paints Anne. She looks lovely, gentle, pale, serene, modest. Henry sees the painting. He falls in love with the JPEG. He swipes right immediately. He signs the marriage contract without ever meeting her. He buys the dream. Let's see. Do you see where this is going? This is the original episode of 90 Day Fiancé. Henry is the delusional older man who thinks a young foreign model loves him for his personality. Anne is the girl who just wants a visa and a stable life. And spoiler alert, when they meet in real life, the filter is going to glitch. Anne travels from Germany to England. It's a long, miserable trip in winter. She arrives at Rochester Castle on New Year's Day, 1540. She is tired. She doesn't speak a word of English. She only speaks German. She knows nothing about English culture. In Germany, ladies were modest, serious, and didn't play games. They covered their bodies from neck to toe. Henry, being a romantic read narcissist with main character syndrome, decides to surprise her. He rides to Rochester in a disguise. He dresses up like a bandit, a Robin Hood type figure in a cloak. He bursts into her private room while she's watching a bull baiting contest out the window. In Henry's head, This is a rom-com. He thinks she will instinctively recognize his royal aura, swoon into his arms, and say, "My hero," even though he's dressed like a beggar. Reality check, a strange, fat, smelly old man in a costume just broke into her room, grabbed her, and tried to kiss her. Anne is terrified. She is disgusted. She pushes him away. She ignores him. She turns back to the window. She treats him like a creepy drunk at a bar. Henry's ego shattered. He storms out. He takes off the disguise. He puts on his purple velvet and gold chains. He comes back in as the king. Now Anne realizes who he is. She bows. She apologizes. But the damage is done. This is the crucial point. Henry didn't hate her because she was ugly. By the way, most ambassadors said she was perfectly pretty. She just dressed differently and had a larger nose than the English style. He hated her because she didn't feed his ego. She gave him the ick. She saw him as a gross old man before she saw him as a king. And Henry VIII, the most fragile man in history, could never forgive a woman for seeing the real him. He goes back to Cromwell and screams the famous line, "I like her not. She is nothing so fair as she has been reported to me." He starts calling her the Flanders Mare. This is classic gaslighting. He can't admit that he's old and gross and that she recoiled from him. He can't admit he's been rejected, so he has to convince everyone that she is the repulsive one. He has to destroy her reputation to save his own pride. They get married anyway. They have to. The political treaty is signed. The Duke of Cleves would be furious if Henry sent her back. But the wedding night, a disaster. Henry comes out the next morning and tells his buddies in the privy chamber, "I struck her belly and her breast, and felt her to be somewhat flabby, and so left her as I found her." He is publicly body-shaming his wife to explain why he couldn't perform. Modern translation, he had erectile dysfunction caused by age and diabetes, but he blamed it on her being unattractive. Now, for 6 months, Anne is in the danger zone. She is alone in a foreign country. She barely speaks the language. She has no friends, and she knows Henry's track record. She isn't stupid. She knows the history. Wife number 1, Catherine of Aragon, divorced, humiliated, daughter declared a bastard. Wife number 2, Anne Boleyn, head chopped off with a sword because the king got bored and paranoid. Wife number 3, Jane Seymour, dead in childbirth. Anne of Cleves knows the axe is sharpening. She sees Henry flirting with a young, giggly teenager named Catherine Howard, wife number 5. Catherine is everything Anne isn't distinctively English. Flirtatious, petite, and stupidly compliant. Anne sees the writing on the wall. The king wants out. And usually, when Henry wants out, women die. Thomas Cromwell, the guy who set up the marriage, is arrested. Henry blames Cromwell for the bad match. Cromwell is thrown into the Tower and eventually executed without a trial. The man who brought Anne to England is headless. Anne is next. This is the moment where most people would panic. They would fight. They would cry. They would write to their brother, the Duke of Cleves, and start a war. They would scream, "I am the queen. You can't do this to me." But Anne does something brilliant. She reads the room. She realizes that her pride is not worth her neck. Henry sends a delegation to Anne. They tell her the king questions the validity of the marriage. He wants an annulment. He says he never consummated the marriage. This is the trap. If she fights it like Catherine of Aragon did, Henry will destroy her. He will declare her an enemy of the state. He might find a reason to execute her for treason. He loves a legal battle, and he always wins because he is the law. Anne assesses the situation. What if she fights? She ends up dead or exiled in poverty. And does she really want to be married to this guy? Let's be real. He smells like rotting meat. He's 300 pounds. He has a temper tantrum every Tuesday. Being his wife is a nightmare. It's not a prize, it's a punishment. It's a job where the severance package is death. So, Anne plays the cool girl. She writes back immediately. She doesn't argue. She doesn't complain. She doesn't say, "How dare you?" She writes, "I am content to be wholly at your majesty's pleasure." She basically says, "Sure, let's break up. I never really liked you anyway. No hard feelings. I'll just be your sister." She even sends back her wedding ring. She tells the court, "I am happy to obey the king." Henry is stunned. He was expecting a fight. He was expecting a screeching, crying woman clinging to the throne. He had his lawyers ready for a war. Instead, he gets total submission. He gets an easy out. Henry is so relieved, so happy that she isn't making this difficult, and so pleased that his ego remains intact, that he decides to reward her generously. He gives her the title, the king's beloved sister. This is a rank higher than any woman in England except the new queen and his daughters. And then he opens the wallet. Let's check the receipts. This divorce wasn't a tragedy. It was the 16th century equivalent of the Jeff Bezos and Mackenzie Scott split. Anne didn't just get a refund. She got a golden parachute. Here is what Anne, the loser, Cleves, walked away with one. Richmond Palace, one of the most modern luxury homes in England. 2. Hever Castle irony alert. This was Anne Boleyn's childhood home. Henry confiscated it when he chopped off Boleyn's head. Now, he gives the dead wife's castle to the smart wife. 3. £4,000 a year in today's money. That is tens of millions. 4. Freedom, the ultimate asset. She answers to no husband. She answers to no father. In Tudor England, a woman was property. But Anne achieved the impossible. She was independent. She had all the perks of royalty, the status, the castles, the food, with none of the downsides, sleeping with Henry, risking death in childbirth, or getting beheaded. She turned a rejection into a winning lottery ticket. Do you think so? Would you rather be the queen, living in fear of the axe, or would you rather be the king's sister, drinking expensive wine in your own castle with zero responsibilities? I know which one I'm picking. The story gets better. Henry marries Catherine Howard immediately. She's young, hot, and exciting. But 18 months later, Catherine cheats. Catherine loses her head. Who is watching this from her safe, luxurious castle, Anne of Cleves? Rumor has it she probably thought, dodged a bullet there? Literally. Then Henry marries Catherine Parr. Anne stays friends with everyone. She becomes a fashion icon. She gambles. She drinks beer. Henry actually liked her once they were divorced. He would visit her for dinner. Why? Because she wasn't a threat anymore. She was just a cool lady he hung out with. She outlived Henry VIII. She outlived his son. She rode in the carriage with Elizabeth I. Think about the butterfly effect. Elizabeth I, the greatest monarch in history, grew up watching these women. She saw her mother Boleyn die for the crown, but she saw Anne of Cleves living her best life without a man. Is it possible Anne taught Elizabeth the most important lesson of all? You don't need a husband to be powerful. In fact, a husband is a liability. Anne died in her bed, wealthy and respected. She is the only wife buried in Westminster Abbey. The ugly wife got the VIP spot. Why is this relevant today? Because Anne is the patron saint of securing the bag. She teaches us a brutal lesson about dealing with narcissists. When a toxic man insults you, your instinct is to scream, I am not ugly, I am worthy. But Anne realized that fighting a narcissist is a losing game. If you fight the king, you lose your head. If you agree with the king, you get paid. She treated the marriage like a business transaction. She stripped her ego out of the equation. She didn't care if they called her a Flanders Mare. She couldn't hear the insults over the sound of her gold coins clinking together. We see this today. When a celebrity's wife accepts a massive settlement and signs an NDA non-disclosure agreement. That is the Anne of Cleves strategy. It isn't weakness. It is calculation. It's saying you are impossible to live with. I'm going to take half your net worth and go be happy somewhere else. Living well is the best revenge, and Anne lived very well. Let's play a quick what if. What if Anne had been beautiful? What if she was exactly Henry's type? She probably would have ended up like Catherine Howard, trapped in a marriage with a decaying tyrant, pressured to produce a son, navigating the snake pit of the court, and eventually dead. Her ugliness was her shield. Her rejection was her salvation. Sometimes, rejection is protection. When you get dumped or lose that job, remember Anne of Cleves. Maybe the universe isn't punishing you. Maybe it's saving you from a beheading. Anne proved that sometimes. Being the one nobody wants is the safest place to be. Because when nobody is watching you, you can run away with the prize. So, let's rephrase the history books. Was she a failure? Absolutely not. Catherine of Aragon died of a broken heart. Anne Boleyn died by the sword. Jane Seymour died in childbirth. Catherine Howard died by the axe. Anne of Cleves, she died rich. She died free. She died single. And she died surrounded by friends. She played the Game of Thrones on hard mode as a foreign woman with no English, and she was the only one to beat the final boss. Let's see, if you were in her shoes, would you have the pride to fight for your marriage, or would you have the smarts to take the castle and the cash? Drop a comment below. Was Anne of Cleves lucky, or was she a genius? And seriously, if a king calls you a horse but gives you a palace, just say nay and take the keys. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and secure your own bag. Peace.